Well, hello, everybody. Today is April 23rd, and we hope that you are doing well, that you're staying safe, and that somehow you're continuing to be able to look to Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes finishing up our Psalm 23. The last few verses say, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Let's take the last phrase, "I will dwell in the house of the Lord." I think that's a faith statement, because let's assume David is writing this, although a lot of scholars say they were probably written quite a bit after David, but let's assume that David writes this. It's about 1000 BC. He's a shepherd in a field, and he writes, "I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." I have a feeling what he's talking about is not the concept of heaven that you and I have, but what he's talking about is actually the temple in Jerusalem. That's where the house of the Lord was. And so that's where he was going to be and where he would live out his life. And as far as he was concerned, that was forever. But I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. But how do we jump ahead now to the 21st century, 3,000 years later? And how do you and I understand dwell in the house of the Lord? Well, I think we have to understand it more figuratively. In this way, you and I, through baptism and through God's design, belong to God. And for how long? Forever. How much do we belong to God? 100%. So you and I live our lives 100% for God. We don't always do it well, but we're living our lives because we belong to God 100%. And we do dwell in God's house on this side of heaven, and then when we close our eyes at the last, we also will be with God for all eternity, whatever that looks like. We're not quite sure what eternity means because we have no reference. We only know time. I know today, tomorrow, next week, a couple of years from now, I can think back 50 years. Those are all easy things for me to do. But to think in terms of forever, well, I think I'll just sit with that and meditate on it. I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever, which means tomorrow God will be there. The next day, God will be there. I think it's in the book of Hebrews where it says, Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. So I'll dwell in the house of the Lord. And then just before that, he says, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me. Goodness, I know, comes from the word tov, is one of the words for good. And good is a good thing. It's a benefit. It's a positive thing. So God's goodness, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. So goodness, I'm trying to think, it's probably not, the psalmist is not saying, oh, every day is going to be just peachy. But I think the psalmist is saying that because he belongs to God and because God is his shepherd, he knows that goodness always follows. Goodness is always there. Almost like goodness would be like a shadow, That's always there. And mercy shall follow me. Mercy comes from the word hesed, which is God's goodness, God's kindness. If you could get the essence of goodness and kindness and put them together, that's kind of what we mean by hesed. That's kind of what we mean by goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. I remember hearing a preacher once talk about goodness and mercy as though they were two angels. Goodness on one side, mercy on the other. We don't need a bad angel on one side and a good angel on the other. Why don't we have two good angels, goodness and mercy? And why that's important is it's outside of what happens to us. I might have a situation where I don't consider it good, but that doesn't mean God's goodness is not still with me. So God's goodness and God's mercy follows all the days of my life, says the psalmist. And how it relates to us? Oh, I think as we're kind of isolated from each other right now, and as we're kind of missing the connection that we have had in the past by being together, by having coffee together and so forth. Boy, it's been kind of difficult, but when I think about God's goodness and mercy, that follows us too. Right now, down this valley, in this valley that we're traveling through, of being isolated, of having to do things differently, of having to understand ourselves as a church differently, God is with us. God's goodness and mercy follows us all the days of our life. And indeed, we will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen.